And I have some prepared remarks that I'm going to give, but I feel compelled initially to speak directly to our brother from Saudi Arabia, who describes his country as his beloved country. And I join him in that. If I'd been alive in 1776 in this country, this would have been my beloved country. And 144 years later, when we solved the problem of women's rights in the United States by giving women the right to vote, this would have been my beloved country. 94 years after we declared independence from Britain, this would have been my beloved country when we took care of the problem of African Americans by making them free men. It would have been my beloved country in 1973 when we finally took care of the rights of women to take care of their own bodies and control their own births in Roe v. Wade. That was my beloved country then. It's a flawed country now. It's my beloved country now, and I understand, and I join you in calling your own country your beloved country, and I think we should applaud that. And I'm certain that over the course of your life, you'll be working as we've been working, frankly, in incremental ways to make your country a better one. Not one of us can point to any regime change on the face of the earth that's resulted in a stable country. Every change in every country in all of history has only remained sustainable by incremental change. We see that in our own country, and we know that we're a better country today than we were in 1776, and 200 years from today, we'll be a better country again. Thank you. I must say that I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I rarely have the opportunity to preach to the converted. Most of the speaking that I do are to audiences that are incredibly skeptical of what I have to say, and so I'm savoring the opportunity to talk to you about my client Waleed Abulkhair, who is a hero by my lights in your country. He's a patriot. He's working, as we are, to make our country better, and whether you agree with him or not, I don't know, but by my lights, he's a patriot because his country is his beloved country too, and he's working to make it better. 2 years ago, Waleed Abulkhair was convicted of crimes against the monarchy for standing up as a lawyer for the human rights of other human rights activists in Saudi Arabia. He was tried twice for the same behavior, first in criminal court and again in the so-called anti-terrorism tribunal. After the first trial, he was sentenced to 3 months imprisonment. Unsatisfied with that result, the monarchy forced him to trial again, and the predetermined verdict under new laws that didn't even exist when he engaged in the behavior that resulted in his arrest, resulted in a sentence of 15 years, a sentence that's without reason and without justice. Sometimes mounting a defense means protesting and even defying laws which are fundamentally unjust. Nelson Mandela, who sat in prison for 27 years waiting for change to happen, said, "When a man is denied the right to live the life he believes in, he has no choice but to become an outlaw." And if Waleed has become an outlaw, he just as certainly has remained a patriot. He continues to express a deep love for his country, like so many here today, and its promise, despite being separated from his family, including his young daughter. He's been imprisoned by a tyrannical regime that wields its limitless power as a sword against the best and the brightest of its citizens. Although the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has repeatedly pledged to comply with various human rights conventions, it nonetheless repeatedly has trampled the basic human rights of Waleed and others who are now languishing in Soviet prisons with crippling sentences of 15, 20, and 30 years. Our moral imperative is to stand and bear witness against the egregious violation of Waleed's rights and the rights of all Saudi Arabians. Waleed continues to practice freedom, even from behind the bars of this barbaric Saudi regime that hacks off the limbs of its citizens, flogs them in public, and condones the stoning of women. Men and women like Waleed who live lives committed to assuring that the laws of justice applied to all people know that justice will not fail. Though they may be brutalized by rich men who rule from thrones of power with armies at their disposal, they know that these tyrants will not endure because, as Martin Luther King sagely observed, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The Saudi government arrested Waleed as he stood in court and convicted him for being a fearless advocate for his clients, many of whom were accused of the same behavior that ultimately resulted in his imprisonment. He stood beside his clients as a true defender of their human rights and demanded that the Saudi court recognize the truth and apply the law fairly. Waleed has earned his place in prison by defending the courageous positions of human rights activists throughout Saudi Arabia, including his wife's brother, the blogger Raif Badawi, who in January of this year was sentenced to 1,000 lashes and 10 years in prison, a brutal sentence which justifiably continues to draw scathing criticism from around the world. Waleed is dedicated in his belief in the rule of law, and he, like most of the world's Muslims, is observant and peace-loving, and as the Quran instructs, he is steadfast in his dedication to God, to human rights, and to free and peaceful discourse. In the Quran it's written, "You who believe, be steadfast in your devotion to God and bear witness impartially. Do not let hatred of others lead you away from justice, but adhere to justice, for that is closer to awareness of God. Be mindful of God. God is well aware of all you do. And God is surely just as aware of all that Waleed has done, and just as surely is aware of all that has been done to him." The governments of the world, including most especially the United States, purport to value human rights, but they are complicit in facilitating the tyrannical behavior of the Saudi government when, as the price of doing business, they silently stand by and fail to actively demand an end to these clear human rights abuses. Our own president, President Obama, in November, stood next to President Hollande in the White House following the tragedy in Paris and called on the nations in the world to abide by what he called their highest ideals in protecting human rights during these difficult times. But those same nations know that the blood falling from the lashing of Raif Badawi is on the hands of each and every government which, by tolerating these barbarous acts, permits them to continue. Make no mistake, Waleed's continued imprisonment is no more than simple, unadorned political prosecution designed to further consolidate the position of one single powerful family's already entrenched stranglehold on Saudi Arabia. It's not jihadists who pose the greatest threat to Saudi Arabia, and it's certainly not those like Waleed who dream of a free and peaceful Saudi Arabia. Rather, the greatest threat to Saudi Arabia is the monarchy's own ongoing assault on basic human rights. Yes. You know, I'm going to go over a little bit. When you look at the definition of terrorism, what you learn is that there is no one definition of terrorism. It's almost impossible to define. It depends who's calling somebody a terrorist. And I ask you that the most basic elements that go into the definition of any kind of terrorism is its behavior that's designed to coerce by threats of violence something within a civil population. And when you look at what it is that the Saudi government is doing, that's terrorism. History shows that despotic dictatorships like Saudi Arabia cannot sustain themselves in a world that's connected and vigilant. Eventually, the dictators will be forced to concede what most of the civilized world has accepted for generations, that open discourse, the peaceful expression of free thought, and the right to peaceably assemble are the necessary pillars of a legitimate and civilized government. And what can we do in the face of such clear injustice? For one thing, we must not allow our own government, indeed the majority of the international community, to continue to turn a blind eye to the Saudi government's flagrant violation of human rights. Unbelievably, Saudi Arabia recently gained a place on the United Nations Human Rights Council in a voting pact with the United Kingdom. No country that prides itself on its commitment to fostering values of freedom, democracy, and self-determination has any business allowing despots to masquerade as guardians of human rights. Indeed, just this November, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention issued a damning report denouncing Saudi Arabia for the illegal detention of Waleed and 8 other human rights activists, including Waleed's client, Raif Badawi. The report correctly characterized their detention as, I'm quoting, reprisal for their work of protecting and defending human rights, and called on Saudi Arabia to take steps to immediately release the detainees and provide reparations for their illegal detention. We each must watch and respond to Saudi Arabia's attack on peaceful dissent. Moreover, we must shine a light on the behavior of all oppressive, tyrannical governments like Saudi Arabia. We must demand that our media outlets continue to broadcast the heinous behavior of oppressive governments and be assured that those governments, that they care about their reputation on the world stage. When we stop seeing the images of oppression, we stop responding, and if that happens, those tyrants will have no reason to change their behavior. Waleed looks the despots in the eye and refuses to cease fighting. He follows in the footsteps of Winston Churchill, who refused to yield to the Nazis and instructed, never give in. Never give in. Never, 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 never. In anything, great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. The freedoms that many of us take for granted, freedom of assembly, of speech, and of religion, don't exist in Saudi Arabia. As Mandela reminded us, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. The best way to honor the sacrifice and contribution of heroes like Waleed, his wife, the leading women's rights advocate in Saudi Arabia, Samar Badawi, Raif Badawi, and countless others, is to pledge an active commitment to expanding human rights and dignity across the world. We must deny the legitimacy of any government that seeks to deny the human rights of its citizens. Waleed can see the day when his countrymen will finally live in a free and open Saudi Arabia. Through the bars of his prison cells, he can see that glorious day because he knows that justice will always prevail. On Waleed's behalf, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,